Welcome everybody. Today we will talk about the TCG Gold Standard and about prize cards or lemons and see what Konami and Legend Story Studios do to produce the most delicious lemonade out of them. In detail, we will see what the gold standard is that Legend Story Studios just released for Flesh and Blood this week in the Collector's Week. And we will see why history will not repeat itself here. Because we will actually compare Flesh and Blood and the TCG Gold Standard to Yu-Gi-Oh! And their prize cards. And I have all the links down below in the description for all the informations that I've used to create this video. And we will also see why sometimes lemons are not enough to make the best prize cards possible and why it is necessary to add in maybe a strawberry to the mix. But before we dive into the topic, I want to quickly make two statements here about this topic. And the first one is Flesh and Blood missed the chance of making their prize cards truly unique. And also Flesh and Blood prize cards are unique. Those two segments we will see in detail in this video, which I will present to you in two parts. And in the first part, we will see why it is actually a win-win situation for players and collectors to have now the gold standard in Flesh and Blood. But we will also look at, in the second part of the video, why Yu-Gi-Oh! Has the far more interesting and unique prize cards. And also, prize cards in Flesh and Blood are much better now what Yu-Gi-Oh! Has these days. So, Flesh and Blood creates TCG prize card history with their gold standard. That's the topic. And we will use for that, like I just showed you, the lemon score. We will rate in different categories 5 out of 5 lemons and see how they actually stack up together. So, before I jump into the topic itself, I want to give you some background information as to why I choose to make this video and why I want to talk about this topic. Because originally I came from Yu-Gi-Oh! So for years and years Yu-Gi-Oh! Was my main TCG hobby, and I was collecting Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. And some of the prize cards that exist in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Sphere, I had actually in my collection and I found very interesting for years back then. So prize cards are in general something that I found really interesting, and with the new release TCG Gold Standard, I was seeing some parallels and some motivations here to actually dive into this topic and compare the TCG Gold Standard to the prize cards that we had in the past and have today in Yu-Gi-Oh! And why do I think Flesh and Blood and their new release TCG Gold Standard is so amazing and also so interesting? I think because I see all the players in the last year that I produced stories about on this channel getting their gold foils, and also how their emotions were when they were getting their gold foils. And I was also freelancing for the company that is producing Flesh and Blood, so for Legend Story Studios. And on that occasion, I was really witnessing the opening of these gold foils and also the opinions when these people were winning the prize cards and when they also could open them for the first time. So I was there last year when the first extended art gold for Crown of Providence was opened. And I was also part of a moment where actually at the Calling Madrid, several players together opened their gold for legendaries, and that was just so amazing. So if you want to check that out, all the links are down in the description. So on the other hand, we have the collectors of these prize cards. And in Flesh and Blood, one of these collectors is Saint Hung from the YouTube channel Fabled Hunters, which I had the pleasure to work together with on some videos. And I I could also witness the moments when he was actually getting some of these prize cards, like the gold foil extended art Fjandal Spring Tunic, which is the first prize card in Flesh and Blood, and also the most sought after prize card in Flesh and Blood. So if you want to have a look at that, also a video about this is down in the description from the Fabled Hunters YouTube channel. And the last background information I want to give you is actually the founder of Flesh and Blood himself, James White, was in the past a really big Yu-Gi-Oh guy. So he was very involved into Konami and Yu-Gi-Oh because he not only had his own Yu-Gi-Oh Singles.com shop, which he shut down just the year before he and LSS launched Flesh and Blood, but he was also the founder of Hobby Co., who was the official New Zealand representative for Konami, the makers of Yu-Gi-Oh! And they were running the national championship since 2005. So I have an article, I found an article about this, which I also linked down below, so you can check that out. And that is like the very interesting part here that I see and I want to talk about with you, have a discussion about that. So if you have any opinions or if you have any other informations about this, maybe you won a gold foil yourself or another prize card in Yu-Gi-Oh, then let's have a discussion about this in the comments. So clearly Yu-Gi-Oh had an influence on Flesh and Blood and also on the creation of the gold standard, in my opinion, at least as I see it from outside when looking and comparing these two companies and games together, how they are treating their prize cards. So let's get the ball rolling and actually let's examine a few questions here to really dive into what it means to have a prize card, to win a prize card, and what prize cards actually mean in TCG. And the first question I want to answer here is, who gets a prize card? Like really basic. And for sure that's the winners of the top tournaments. So either the best performing players or the players that are winning these tournaments. And there are the high competitive tournaments, the high tier level tournaments, but there are also low rank competitive tournaments. And we will here also compare in a few minutes Yu-Gi-Oh to Flesh and Blood, how they are today and how they were having their tournament structure. And the second question regarding to prize cards, I think is, how well can a player sell their prize card? Because for sure, prize cards are one of the foundations of how a player that is actively and also very highly into playing competitively, how can these players make back part of the money that they actually need to put in to compete. And the first part, of course, is how rare the card actually is. So the prize card, how many of them, are out there, and then also how playable is the prize card. So is the prize card maybe a card that sees actual competitive play? But then also, of course, it's not only about selling the prize cards. Some players are not looking to sell the prize cards. They are just want to have a remembrance, a treasure to hold on to. And that's nostalgia, of course, because you can look back at the card and remember the moment and the tournament and all the effort you put into winning this card and competing at the tournament. And also, very interestingly, some of the prize cards are event exclusives, and we clearly see a difference here in Yu-Gi-Oh! And on Flesh and Blood, and we will dive more into detail in these two videos together. And then also, of course, the quality of the card itself. How well is it preserved? In what condition is the card? That is, of course, for highly interest for the player, but also for the collector or the buyer of the card. Is it in pristine condition? Does it has any whitening? And I think here is really interesting to see that Flesh and Blood actually takes the leap and partnered up with the grading company Premier Card Grading, which is pre-grading their prize cards. And we see this here on the picture. Actually, they are only giving out mint prize cards. So cards that can get a 9 or higher on the grading scale are given out for the prize cards in Flesh and Blood. And when you give this to then PCG, you can be for sure that this will get a mint grading. So I think that is for big interest for all the collectors and all the players. And then, of course, the last question I want to ask here is, how satisfied will a collector be with the card? So we already talked about the quality, but then also about the scarcity. So how limited is the print run? How big are the print run numbers? And we already saw this up here. So this correlates with how rare is the card. And in Flesh and Blood, it's really interesting to see that not only the cards are really rare, also like in Yu-Gi-Oh, where the prize cards are of very limited numbers, but you actually have now with the TCG Gold Standard and Flesh and Blood, the actual information that all the prize cards with the numbers are preserved, because all the other cards that were produced and are not given out are actually destroyed. And we already saw this with the Goldfoil Fjandal Spring Tunic, which LSS did film the destruction of and put it out. And if you want to check that out, I have a video link down below of the Ragamuffin Man, a fellow YouTuber. So go check that out. It's really amazing to see all the reactions to this, because of course there are two sides here. Some people say, that's so amazing, we have the actual information that not other cards are given out on the back door or someone has it, and other people say, oh, it's so damn disgusting that these cards are destroyed. But I think when we are looking at the gold standard in a few minutes, this is a really good thing to have. So I want to quickly here also look at what kind of tournaments are we having and where can you actually get these prize cards. We have what I found very interesting here in Flesh and Blood, this ladder, the different tiers for organized play, and there you can see we have the lower tournaments, and then we have already Battle Hardened Pro Quest season, where you can get common and rare and majestic gold foils, so prize cards. And then after that we have nationals and callings, where you can get the higher tier, the legendary gold foils, and then we have the pinnacle of the organized play, the Pro Tour and World Championship, where you can get also the legendary gold foils, but also other prize cards, which we will take a look at. But how does this compare to Flesh and Blood compare to Yu-Gi-Oh here? And from my information that I have, we of course have the lower tier tournaments in the local scene, where you can get the tournament packs, where you get exclusive ultimate rares, which are not prize cards, but are kind of reward for taking part in the tournament. And I also remember back then you had these store championships which had kind of prize cards, these trophies, which are given out alongside a prize card at the higher tournaments, both for Flesh and Blood and Yu-Gi-Oh! But back then you had these cards embedded in the trophy. I don't think you have this today anymore, but I at least wanted to mention it, because when we are looking at Yu-Gi-Oh! We had, of course, the Shonen Jump Championship back then, the first really big TCG tournament that was given out prize cards that were actually meant to being used in the duels, in the competitive play. And today you have the YCS, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series, which are kind of comparable to the Calling or the Pro Tour. But there is a difference which we will look at. And then of course you also have a World Championship in Yu-Gi-Oh! 2. And that is really important here for the comparison of the prize cards, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Does treat this very differently than Flesh and Blood. So then I have a few photos here to make you all a little bit heated for the topic, because these are actually the prize cards that we will talk about in Yu-Gi-Oh! The Shonen Jump Championship prize cards and also the YCS prize cards. And we will also look at the World's prize cards and the people that are winning these. And Joschua Schmidt actually also made a video about this topic with the current prize card, the YCS prize card. So we will take a look at why this is so important to compare the current situation in Yu-Gi-Oh! To the situation, how it was, and how this influenced Flesh and Blood and the creation of the gold standard. So I think we can have a first score here, and I actually want to give both Flesh and Blood and Yu-Gi-Oh! A lemon score of 5 out of 5 here, because it is so amazing to actually have prize cards in these TCGs, and you can be lucky if you have one, because it's really, really damn work to get these prize cards, and there are not that much out there. And then up here we have some photos of Flesh and Blood prize card winners, and that is the first difference we actually have here, because we are seeing, of course, like we already talked about, the already graded prize cards, and we have a difference here because I was showing you the pre-graded gold foils, but we also have gold foils that are being already graded in the case, and that is actually for the calling prize card, the extended art gold foil, and we will take a look at this in the second video in more detail. But then we also have up here the envelopes. What are envelopes? Like, why are we having envelopes in prize cards? I mean, when you are coming from Yu-Gi-Oh! You know what kind of prize card you are getting, right? And that is actually not the case in Flesh and Blood. In Flesh and Blood, you are getting a random gold foil. You are not guaranteed a specific gold foil, other than when you are competing, I think, at the World Championship, when you are having a class hero. So let's say you are having a ninja, you are playing ninja, then you are getting a ninja gold foil. But otherwise, you are rewarded a random gold foil in these envelopes, which you actually need to open up. And I will just show you one of these envelopes here. This is what it looks like, a Legend Story Studios black envelope where you pull your prize card from, and the prize card is in the envelope. So that is why I was showing you before. It is actually really emotional, and it is really a rush when you have the opportunity to open up these envelopes, and for sure that is of very interest for the players. So let's jump back here. We also have here a photo of the world champion. So there you also see the trophy of the world championship last year in Flesh and Blood, that also has the prize card, which is really different in Yu-Gi-Oh! And we also see it's already graded. And that is a very, very interesting point to compare these kind of prize cards here to the World Championship prize cards that we have in Yu-Gi-Oh! So before we will take a look at the gold standard, I want to mention for these two videos, games and winning tournaments are not about the money. That is for me a really important part to mention, because we are talking a lot about the value and the scarcity of these cards, but actually competing in these tournaments and winning these cards is often not about the money. But it is important that these prize cards actually have value. We already talked about this. It's important that the player have the opportunity to sell this card, and in Yu-Gi-Oh! More so than in Flesh and Blood. Because in Flesh and Blood you are also rewarded cash prizes in addition to the prize card. But it is alongside the value also important that the player can actually treasure the win. That's the purpose of the prize card, of the trophy. So let's actually see what the gold standard is. And for that, we will open up the Flesh and Blood page, so the fabtcg.com page, and we were seeing here some photos on top. So actually right off the bat, we are having here the gold foils. So this is actually a gold foil, which you see a card with a golden border, which is very different to what you have in the normal cards where they have a silver border. So this gold foil treatment is actually what we are having for the prize cards in Flesh and Blood. But the card itself is exactly the same like it is in the normal booster box, for the exception of the calling prize cards, which are extended art. And we also have here the numbers actually, and that is like the very interesting part. I will just quickly zoom in a little bit more. I think this is better readable here. So the gold refinery, that's like the part where they are talking about the numbers, and you can actually see here you have for every category, for every rarity, the number of maximum cards that are given out for this tier. So for the extended art legendaries, it's 25 all the way up to 100 for the commons. And you also have let's open it up, the exact tables. So you can, for every card, see the number that was given out already and the number of cards that are being unallocated. So that's really amazing, right? Let's just see here for the calling, of course, it is 100% drop rate. 100% drop rate. So that means that when you are the calling champion, you are guaranteed to get this prize card. We already talked about this with the black envelopes. And you see here with the Fjarnal Spring Tunic, the first extended art legendary, it is a little bit different because this was actually given out before this TCG Gold Standard was created. And that's why there are more of these prize cards than of the following. So then we are having the normal gold foil legendary. So the only difference between these cards and the normal cards are the gold foil borders. And here you also have, of course, all the tournaments that you can win it in, but you also have the number of cards that are already given out and also the number of cards that are not given out at the moment. So you actually have the chance of pulling one of the first prize cards down the line when you are lucky or when you are playing one of these heroes at the World Championship. And that also results in this drop rate, so you can measure what kind of a chance you have to pull these cards. And of course, this drop rate will go down most of the time because more cards are being added to this gold foil batch. Because you already see here when I scroll down, there are a lot of these legendaries and more are being added over time. So let's scroll down. Yeah, so the last table here is for the gold for majestic, rares and commons. There is also the exact same information for that. And that is basically the gold standard that we have here for Flesh and Blood. And I think that's really amazing. When you see at how this compares to Yu-Gi-Oh! This is like one of the top reasons why I think the gold standard is really amazing. And in the next episode of part 2 for this series, we will see why Flesh and Blood missed the chance of making their prize cards truly unique, and also why Yu-Gi-Oh! Has the far more interesting unique prize cards. But with that, you will also see that Flesh and Blood prize cards are actually unique. We already saw this with the gold standard. And then also prize cards in Flesh and Blood are now much better what Yu-Gi-Oh! Has. And that is the core, I think, for what came over from Yu-Gi-Oh! To Flesh and Blood prize cards, and why it is so amazing that LSS actually decided to do this. So let's jump into the second video.